Well, there is one thing that has captured our attention this year. Nope, not getting tickets to Taylor Swift, but actually artificial intelligence. What really is it? Should we celebrate it or fear it? Our imagination is running wild with possibilities. I'm excited to say that I can't wait to hear this first panel of experts today. Justine Phillips will moderate a panel that will explore the possibilities of using AI for cybersecurity. Thanks so much.
That was funny. That was funny. All right. That's so good. Okay. I felt a little bit like church. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our esteemed colleagues and panelists. I'll start here with Heather Adkins. Heather is the VP of Security at Google. Morgan is the Director of Cyber Collaboration at the NSA. And David is the Managing Director at Deloitte. The theme of cyber resilience and readiness hits home for us. In the wake of the attacks in Israel, cybersecurity is Homeland security. Coupled with the Executive Order 14028, our country has been activated to take action around cybersecurity, laws, regulations, agencies, private sector, public sector. We're going to explore and dive deep into artificial intelligence and what that means for cybersecurity. I'd first like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and their current role in their organizations and how AI has changed your daily responsibilities. Heather, let's start with you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Heather Adkins, Vice President of Security Engineering at Google. I roughly function in what's our enterprise CISO role. We've been using artificial intelligence in our internal operations for a little over a decade. And we use that for anomaly detection, for threat actor detection, spam detection, and we have experimented with these hypotheses that have been in the industry for a really, really long time. The first paper that was written on AI and neural networks for cyber was in the late 80s. That's the earliest one I can find. And we've been trying to use it for a very, very long time. But yeah, about a decade ago, we got really successful in using it for anomaly detection. And we're also very excited to see what is going to come with the generative AI revolution, which we are now all playing with through our chatbots. But let's be clear, chatbots are not product. Chatbots are not the end goal. Those are the ways that we are getting introduced to this idea of deep learning models that will appear to mimic people. But I'll give you just a really simple example. I got to play around with some early BARD experiments. BARD is one of Google's generative AI algorithms. And I said, hey, BARD, I'd really love to paint my house. And it asked me what color. And I said, well, I'd really love to paint it the color bicycle. And then it said, oh, I love riding bicycles. And then it just took me into this conversation. And I thought, okay, it's not going to quite take over the world yet. It doesn't know that painting a house is different than a bicycle. Now, these things are going to improve over time. But we should remember we're in very early days. Most of us are experiencing this through a chatbot. But that's not the end. This is a really innovative and revolutionary technology that will get built into all of the creative, productive tools that we all use every day, more or less behind the scenes.
That's great, Heather. And I know we're really at the forefront, Morgan, and you have such an interesting role with the agency. What is that role and how has that changed as of November of last year?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, Morgan Adamski, I'm the director of NSA's Cybersecurity Collaboration Center. It's about 3 years old, but it's really the external face for the cybersecurity director at NSA, and it's really built on the foundation of sharing our insights directly with the private sector to include the defense industrial base, as well as providing technical expertise. And it's been in a journey for the last 3 years. We sit outside the fence line. We're doing a lot of sharing in an unclassified environment that's different for NSA. It's not something that we typically do. So when it comes to artificial intelligence, to Heather's point, we've been doing AI for a really long time. It's something that NSA has always looked at as a technology to look at how we're going to improve our processes, our workflows, and grow our workforce. But now with the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, right, one of our key focuses is securing AI systems for use in national security systems and for the defense industrial base. And so a couple of weeks ago, General Nakasone stood up and said, we will be establishing an AI security center as part of the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center. So it will be a new initiative for us, but we are just going to take the experience and the knowledge that we've built over the last decade or so and use that to produce best practices. So when we do take those systems and put them in national security systems and the defense industrial base uses them for the Department of Defense, we'll know that they'll have that type of security baked in from the front.
Oh, that is exciting for that collaboration and information sharing. David, what is your current role and how has that changed? How has AI changed your responsibilities?
So, hello everyone, Dave Caswell. I'm Deloitte's Managing Director for AI Lead for Cybersecurity Strategic Risk for the government public sector. This last 6 months has been kind of an emergent event for us with respect to Gen AI, much towards, Deloitte's had a long history of using AI traditionally for detection and anomaly detection or trying to automate different events. But with generative AI, it's really changing the landscape. And we've seen a lot of work going into examinations of how do we protect these systems to make sure that they are doing what they're expected to do at all times, but also protecting from emergent threats that we're seeing in the generative AI space from threat actors who are using it for, kind of the similar attacks, but different, right? Similar in that they're still, we're seeing a lot of identity attacks, for example, but different in that we're now seeing it in automation and personalized and a much more tailored, directed capability. And how do we think about protecting our clients and our own business from said emergency?
So, as an attorney that specializes in cyber law, we tell stories. This is our job. And a cyber story really starts with language. And artificial intelligence can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So for our panelists, Morgan, let's start with you. What do we mean by artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so we think of artificial intelligence at NSA really as a basis of systems and networks that enable us to improve our workflows, a specific technology that's going to just allow us to move faster. If you work in the cybersecurity community, scale, do more with less is literally the motto, I think, of the cybersecurity professionals that do this every single day. And so we look at AI, we really think about that technology and the networks and the language, essentially, that's going to be built on specific language models, how it enables us to build algorithms, how it enables us to actually look at that and build those workflows that are going to make us more effective.
Excellent. Heather, are we talking about generative AI, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, automation of log files? What does it mean for you and Google?
All right, let's leave quantum out of this conversation. That's another part of the multiverse that we don't
Next year,
touch on
next year.
which I'm very passionate about as well. I think artificial intelligence, when it comes down to the very basic definition, is this concept that our forebearers had, whether it's a Charles Babbage or an Alan Turing, this idea that we could create a general purpose machine that can behave like a human, okay? And when you interact with it, it seems just like a human, okay? And when we think about the outcomes, as we've been talking about a little bit here today, we're really thinking about where might we use it, okay? So imagine that you are in the medical profession and you are going to, create a new pharmaceutical drug. You might use AI to help you design new proteins or to understand the protein structure of, say, an emerging virus. And we've already got some, seeing some amazing results. That is also something we thought we could do with quantum computers. Turns out, a little bit easier with AI. Let's imagine you're a security professional working in an enterprise such as Google's. We're starting to build these tools into the daily workflow. And where I'm seeing the easiest things to solve are things like writing good reports. Nobody writes good reports. But you can have an outline, give it to the model, and it will write a very polished report for you, right? But it'll also save you time, and it takes away the toil of the job. One of the things we know about security professionals is that they get burnt out very easily after a few years. It's a hard job. And they don't like writing reports for more than like the first 2 or 3 or 8 times. So it's going to be things like that. We also know that it will help them write better code. In fact, we have this vision that there is a world where all of the code we write is free of bugs. All the code that's old that we maintain can be better maintained, because when you go to make changes to it, it will find the bugs that have been there for 20 years. And as you are writing new code, it will just be a lot easier. And we're already seeing the proof points of this. We've done some experiments with one of our models called SecPalm, and there's a few other companies in the space doing this. We now have a partnership with DARPA. It's a 2-year challenge to inspire teams to build tools to help developers write code better. So I think we're actually using the tools in these kinds of ways to help cyber and to help developers just in general do their jobs better. But there's like 100 of those examples I could give you. That's what we really mean when we say cyber. But deep down underneath, it is a kind of general purpose tool that we can build into whether you're a doctor, nurse, working in chemicals, or working in cyber.
What does AI mean to you over at Deloitte?
I liked, pulling a couple threads from, Morgan's comment about scale, I think is one. The other one I would say is pattern recognition, right? Non-traditional pattern recognition. So a lot of times when I talk to folks about AI, right, that there's the spectrum of stuff. You want to do an automation or a capability, right? If you can do it with an if statement, do it with an if statement. We always know deterministically what an if statement will do. But if you can't think of how to tell a computer how to detect something in this voluminous amounts of data at a rapid scale, then that's where you should be looking at AI as the enabling function to try to drive that. And that's going in, so traditional, when I say traditional, large-scale deep neural networks, that kind of stuff, that's what they are historically, and what we've seen tremendous promise and capability from them. Things like image recognition, that kind of stuff. As we move into the generative AI world, we're kind of flipping the head on that, right? Where it's no longer just it can detect something, but now it can create something that's also very similar. It's complex, connections of objects that we as humans naturally pull together as strings, sentences, paragraphs, pages, books. And what we're seeing is now in the AI sense, it can do that at scale fairly well, albeit coloring a house with bicycle is perhaps an area to go improve on. But towards what Heather said, right, these are going to improve over time, right? We are living in a world where we will use AI, whether you know it or not. Almost everyone in this room probably uses Google Maps. I'm just going to assert it's still the market dominator by leaps and bounds. You're using AI. And so now the interesting question is, how do we then leverage that into all of the different other aspects of our activities, whether it's cybersecurity or your mission operations or collaboration like our previous discussants? Right? What can it do to take the data, put it into a manner that's rapidly assess it in a manner that can help you, inform you for your decision makings and your prioritizations, help to create and get rid of manual tasks so that you can have your workforce, focus on those areas that you need them to focus on to improve whatever your mission or business purposes are.
So interesting, because really we understood software and how to defend against software, but now with generative AI, it's the perceptive and cognitive abilities of the technology that have added this new element. And defending data breaches, something that I've seen more recently has been the automation of certain formerly human functions. So if a threat actor was able to get into an email account, it was before, it looked to be a human interacting with the technology. Now it's an automated process, and it's so fast. And at some of the research we're seeing coming out now, we're seeing attacks 5 minutes faster. Well, when it's a 19-minute attack, that's a 25% quicker infiltration and speed. So the weaponization of AI by our foreign adversaries and cyber adversaries, as some of them may not be foreign. I'd like to turn to how AI and how the NSA, your role, Morgan, is so interesting. It's Got collaboration in the title. And it's an interesting function. So I'd love to hear how you guys are tackling the weaponization of AI with our adversaries and what your perspectives are on that.
Look, for us, it's really about, it's another tool for our adversaries to use, right? And so when we think about what concerns us most in our adversaries using generative AI or that type of technology, we really break it down to scope, scale, and speed, right? So scope is the fact that they are able to use this type of technology to have more tailored messaging for spear phishing messages. It makes it so much easier for them to really focus in on a target and be able to send something that does not look as though it is coming. You know, we used to be able to do all the cybersecurity awareness training. You'd be able to pick out an email right away. You get 100% in your company. It'd be great. We're going to have to get better about detecting these type of things, and it's going to get even harder. And so that's something that we think about in terms of scope. In terms of scale, the fact of the matter is if we're able to use AI technology to be able to really double down, our adversaries double down on their efforts against specific vulnerabilities, right? That's going to be very concerning. We talk about the fact that when we saw the People's Republic of China taking advantage of the Hafnium vulnerability, the Microsoft vulnerability, a couple years ago, and it publicly came out that they were doing that, they did not stop. They doubled down on that activity. Imagine being able to leverage AI to be able to even triple that, to quadruple that. We all have patch fatigue in terms of keeping our networks up to date. And so now network defenders are going to have to move in even quicker. And then we go to speed. Speed is a very big concern. We've got to make our defense even more stronger than what our adversaries are doing every single day, which means that we have to become quicker in how we are taking advantage of closing those holes, really securing technology. And to Heather's point, that's going to begin at the beginning. Secure by design, secure by default. We've got to have secure coding. We've really just got to make it that much harder for our adversaries to move out and to move out quickly.
And we know there's research happening at the agency.
Yep.
Is that research going to be shared? What are the thoughts there?
Yeah, so first and foremost, as you mentioned, there is collaboration in my title. So one of our big goals is ensuring that if we know that nation-state adversaries are developing a capability or that they're taking advantage of generative AI to improve their operations, we're going to ensure that we can get that information out at the lowest classification possible to the people that need it. That means we need to ensure that the AI companies, right, the US has the advantage there. We need to keep that strategic advantage, have the threat information to protect their networks and to protect their intellectual property, right? We don't want our adversaries to steal that technology and use it against us. Secondly, if we have insights on the vulnerabilities or how our adversaries are trying to take advantage of AI to be able to gain access to networks that we care about, especially in the national security realm, we're going to produce best practices document, and that will be public, and I'm sure that will be with our colleagues at CISA and NIST and industry as well. We have a lot of these collaborative discussions happening. We're going to produce that so everyone can benefit from it, both at the technical level for the practitioners, but also at the strategic level so that board members can know about it as well.
She mentioned AI companies. It seems to me every company is an AI company these days. But Heather, on the weaponization of AI and by foreign adversaries, what is that for Google, and how are you guys thinking about solving that problem?
I actually think the defenders are in a pretty good position. I'm actually an optimist on this. I hear lots of people talk about scary AI stuff in the hands of our threat actors, and I do worry. But look, in cybersecurity, we have a deficit of jobs, deficit of people, between 300,000 and 1 million, depending on who you listen to. So we have a pipeline problem. There just simply aren't enough people in the job. And one of the reasons is that it's a really hard job, hard to get people trained up to an equivalency level that they need. And also, once they're in that job, sometimes they're the only person at the company, or of 2 or 3, and the job is really hard. And then secondly, we have this retention problem because people burn out. I actually think AI for cyber is really about enabling people. And in that case, I think we have approximately 150 places in the life cycle of a security engineer's role where we could make that job more sustainable, more interesting, and survivable. And I think if we can do that, we will both fix the pipeline problem and we'll fix the retention problem and bring defenders up to a pretty high level. It'll also bring us speed. And then at the same time, we have to do the non-AI stuff, the hygiene. We have to remember to brush our teeth and floss and wear our seatbelts, kind of the foundations of cyber, patch your systems. zero trust, good multi-factor authorization or authentication. If we can do the foundations plus give the workforce an uplift, I'm not too worried about what the bad guys are able to do.
Well, 85% of critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector. And of that, the vast majority are SMBs. And while I'm very optimistic with you that Google has excellent security, what about the SMBs? And are there efforts made to help harden their security?
Yeah, I think this is where the hygiene comes into great perspective. We could build all the AI you want. Think of it as the stained glass windows, beautiful artwork on the walls. But if you've made the building out of kind of unsafe materials, the whole thing falls down. I think that's what if you go to a dentist's office or you go to a hospital, or we look at just what happened with MGM and Caesars, these are where the secure foundations just don't exist, mostly because on the market, we're still trying to uplift kind of the general purpose off-the-shelf tools. I look at some of the work we've done at Google over the years. We have the Chrome web browser, probably the most secure web browser out there, so secure that Microsoft now uses it to ship Edge, which is their web browser. We've built a secure operating system called Chrome OS that's never had a ransomware attack that we know of. We use security keys at Google. This is something we developed in coordination with the FIDO Alliance. And since implementing it, we've not had a successful password phishing attack against Google. That just means my security team gets to do other things than deal with password phishing, right? So if we can kind of solve some of these secure by default problems, that's things that small to medium-sized businesses can use. And I want that. My dentist is still using Windows 7. The dentistry doesn't bother me, but that Windows 7 machine really does make me nervous.
Well, I think even HIPAA security rules are getting a refresh these days.
Yeah, I hope so.
So the interesting aspects of consulting around this space, you have the weaponization of AI. You're probably on the front lines, members of your team, certainly on incident response on the front lines. What specifically are we seeing?
Yeah, good question. So and you brought up the MGM. So I think it's probably worthwhile. Let's pull that thread and kind of take it to the Gen AI space on it. So MGM attack, Scattered Spiders is ostensibly who conducted the attack. It looks like, at least the unofficial reporting we're seeing is it was some type of voice phishing attack. So someone called an IT help desk person and said, I need to reset a password, and therefore they now have a password to do that. Notice I almost said no cyber in there, right? Like at that point in time, it was a human being who released a password. That password gave access, and that access then allowed them to do cybery things to move, escalate, and then to do a ransomware attack. 90% of all attacks or more are done by that, right? By some type of a human-to-human connection, either a phishing email or a phone call or other kind of vehicle that they then get access into the environment. When we look at what's the advent of, particularly in the Gen AI space, right, what threat actors are creating with their XXX GPT, Wolf GPT, these types of tools, which are large language models that were built and trained to be malicious, right? So they can either create malicious code, previously undetected code for locking out a system and doing cryptographic things for a ransomware attack. Or more generally, what they're being used for is kind of like if anyone's used any of the large language models, they're asking the question about the bike, right? Can you write me an email targeting this individual? Here's all kinds of information about this individual. Make it a tailored email so that they really want to click the cat video or whatever link that might be at the bottom of said email. Towards what Morgan was talking about, the scale and the automation. So we have, these tools can go, or threat actors can actively scan social media to get lots and lots of bespoke information about a given persona, any person in this room or anywhere else, or in any of your organizations. Then use a large language model to craft specific bespoke emails or other vehicles, communication vehicles to any one of those people, and all they need is someone on that chain to then accidentally click a link or intentionally click a link because they think it's from their grandmother and not from a malicious actor, or to pick up a phone call and give credentials or otherwise give access. Right? That's the kind of thing that the large language model error is, and we're just seeing it kind of increase. So, the text email is one approach. The natural progression of that will then be inevitably some type of voice phishing thing, so that it can now fully emulate the voice. So if you have someone that's calling for you, if you have a CEO of an organization or if you're the director of your agency that gives a phone call saying, no, I need this now, right? How compelling is that if you have voice authentication? Well, do you actually know that it's the director? Have you done some type of secondary backup communications in order to confirm that compliance? And then eventually, a lot of us still have work remotely, right? That can transition all the way to some type of being video fakes, which we just saw with Tom Hanks and as an example. So anything of this basically means unless you're seeing someone in person and you know that person, there needs to be backup controls in order to protect against it, which goes to very much what Heather was talking about, right? Multi-factor authentication. How can you, in a secondary channel, confirm that that person does have access and is authorized to go request whatever that information that they're asking from you from? How do you make sure that if someone gets into your environment that you reduce the blast radius? Things like zero trust controls, right? If the idea of zero trust is that if you're not familiar with it, is in a cybersecurity environment, someone gets out in a presence, assume that any person and connection they have it has to be re-authenticated for any further progression. And so what that means is if a bad actor happens to get access, which you have to assume, Gen AI is then increasing that probability all the more because of the ability to be tailored. How can you protect so that if that actor is able to get onto that device, that it can't do any further harm? Anything that has automation for creating a human touch point, right? I would say is where Gen AI we're seeing in the threat space. But again, like a lot of the controls are classic controls. It's just, you got to double down on the hygiene, if you will. Yeah.
So the synthetic content that is being put out by threat actors to, whether it's voice or emails or videos, the MGM Grand, I think, was a great example that you used, because it's not really a technology failure. It's a failure of process.
Yes.
And so the ability to act quickly in the wake of those types of attacks, there's so much information out there. And I worry about SMBs. I worry about it being the real backbone and fabric of our critical infrastructure for our country. How do we get that and flow that information? That little advice to say, do not allow admin passwords to be changed at a help desk, period. That's really what the lesson was learned. How do we get that information in the hands of the people that need to make the change?
Well, I think it's groups like this, right? It's this kind of group which SMBs are going to look to the government. They're going to look to consulting. They're going to look to large agencies and to the Googles of the world to try to, give advice for how not to lose their entire livelihood in business. And the more that these kind of groups can upskill our awareness of what's actually happening in fear versus reality, but also to provide recommendations on controls that are achievable. Things like multi-factor Google's had an authenticator app for years that they've provided for free for the entire ecosystem. That small change can protect against an inordinate amount of attacks, much less so than the YubiKeys and more advanced type of RSA tokens.
So I think one thing I would just offer is I know at the center that I run, we focus a lot on SMBs as it relates to the defense contractors, right? And a lot of times we were in discussions with them. We offer cybersecurity services as a part of the Department of Defense, and we'll walk them through how to set up those services, and they'll be like, look, I don't have an IT department. My son that helps me isn't home from high school until 3. And quite honestly, having my son talk to NSA, we'll have to work through that. And I'm like, it'll be great. It'll be fine. We'll have this discussion. So, part of the discussion right now is about how we are shifting responsibility and accountability to those entities that can shoulder it, right? The larger organizations. And I don't think there's a silver bullet. I don't think you can do one and then the other. I think you really have to do multiple different layers here if we're talking about how we're defending about our adversaries. But I'm going to be positive because Heather has put some sunshine on it. I do think that the defenders and the fact that we are having a lot of conversations now between public and private is really changing the game for how we are getting after adversaries, and we are closing the loop and closing the holes on specific vulnerabilities in networks. I would offer that a lot of the work when we talk about scale, which is just a word that we talk about often, is how do we share critical information about adversaries and their techniques with the internet service providers, the cloud providers, the content delivery, the big categories of the ecosystem, so that when we give them information and they feel confident enough to action it, it protects billions and hundreds of thousands of companies and billions of endpoints worldwide, right? That's how we do it at scale. It doesn't mean that we don't need to talk to a small to medium-sized business that is a critical component in a missile platform. For the Department of Defense, that is critical. We might need to still have those conversations, but how, for those really sophisticated things and those techniques, do we leverage the relationships that we've built over the last couple of years and ensure that information is getting there and as timely as quickly as possible? But I would offer that those baseline activities, most of the time people will say, hey, how do I protect against the People's Republic of China and the Chinese cyber threat? It is a top 10 list, and it's all the things that Heather, and that was mentioned here, right, in terms of multi-factor authentication, patch your systems, segment your networks. Like, these are basic things, unfortunately, but it's usually the way that the adversaries are getting in. And most often now, we don't see adversaries using malware. Like, the most common way to find an adversary in your network is to find the malware. They're not using malware anymore. They're using things like getting past identity access management or acting like you're someone else when you're not. That's a huge concern because that is really hard to find on the defender side. But I am positive that we will use AI to be able to do that even quicker and to remediate those activities.
That's a great segue into cyber defenders and how we are defensively utilizing artificial intelligence. Heather?
Yeah, I'll say, just really quickly before I chat about AI just for a moment. I mean, I think what we're seeing right now with the proliferation or what we call the democratization of hacking is that there are just so many techniques that are still very easy and cheap. Mm-hmm. And we need to make it much more expensive. And the way we do that is we give small to medium-sized businesses, large businesses, the solutions right out of the box. You shouldn't have to rely on your high school student to secure your business. You should be able to take the solution you bought, plug it in, and you're ready to go. And these are technology choices that we as platform providers make, right? So secure by default needs to be the mantra, needs to be the mission. This is true of AI as well. And AI is a software platform like any other, and we have to have principles about how we build it securely. We've worked on something called the Secure AI Framework, or SAFE, that lays out our principles for this, but it's actually not that different than normal software we would build. For example, we need to know the provenance of all of the training data. We need to know the provenance of how the model worked as we built it, and we need to be able to provide those guarantees at the other end. That's just one example. But again, I think AI for defense is really going to come down to enabling defenders on the ground to make the best choices that they can as they're defending a network, whether it's setting up a dentist's office for the first time, choosing the right configuration options and all the little checklists and buttons and making sure that those don't change. It's going to be blending intelligence. I dream of a day, probably long after I retire now, unfortunately, but where we have self-defending systems, where the machines know enough about themselves and what the bad actors might do that they can change the battlefield in real time. That raises the bar, right? That makes the attack very expensive. And it tips us into this concept of resiliency, of accepting that, we're going to get attacked, but when we do, we're going to recover so quickly that the threat actor didn't really have an opportunity to achieve their goals. And I think that's where we're roughly pushing the whole ecosystem. We've been doing this for a long time. If you've ever logged into your Gmail account and you've gotten a CAPTCHA, so like solve the impossible puzzle problem.
Fail every time.
I think everybody knows. Or if we've alerted you that there's been an attack on your account, that's an AI-powered system behind the scenes making a risk call and alerting you to that, right? And we can do that at the machine level, software level, et cetera. More work to be done here, but that's the end state for defenders, self-defending systems.
David?
Yeah, so some of the things I'm really excited about in the Gen AI space on the blue side, right? The blue forces, the security defenders. It's, you know, we're going to continue to see advances in neural network kind of AI doing detections and capabilities and signatures. But I think one of the most empowering things that's happening is particularly in Gen AI and SecPom, if you haven't seen it, it's fantastic what they're doing, it's empowering the workforce. And so as opposed to just having the AI magically discover something that's never been discovered, they're allowing the cyber defenders, right, to actively identify threats and then quickly, with a co-pilot mechanism, right, create scripts that are going to be able to go scale it rapidly. And it takes a workforce thing which would historically take hours or days now into minutes. And anything we can do that gives that kind of power to the good guys, if you will, right, is going to, I think, be inordinate multipliers for our cybersecurity writ large. The other thing, you know, and that's why I really like the composition of this panel, you know, those types of tools and those indicators of compromise are now being shared everywhere. So it's not just one person they've discovered and they're good. It's now rapidly kind of getting across the whole ecosystem. So whatever that new protection that was just found or that threat that's just been identified, it's now something that in, you know, on the blue side, it's not just, it's now going to everyone. Right? So we are all able to benefit off of any one of these defenders. And the good news is there are more defenders than there are bad guys. Right? Historically, it's been an asymmetric fight where the bad guys, they only need to get in once. But now we've got thousands upon, you know, towards millions of people who are on the good guy side, able to rapidly share, able to now be aided by AI in order to generate. Right? We got to fight. I mean, it's a really compelling stance that we're now in that even a year ago, I don't think we had nearly the capability against.
I'm feeling a tremendous amount of optimism from this panel on our fight. I do want to ask a bit about where we fall in the global landscape. You know, cybersecurity, the weaponization of AI doesn't really recognize geographic boundaries. With geopolitical tensions, with foreign adversaries utilizing and exploiting different types of source code, supply chain, where do we land globally with respect to our role, our country's role, in setting some form of leadership in this space? And Heather, maybe we'll start with you.
I think we have a really good story to tell on leadership in technology. And if you think about where the major platforms are built that run most of the world, not just critical infrastructure in the US, but in the world, a lot of that is developed in the United States and our allies and you know, aligned idealists. I think the interesting thing that we've seen on the global landscape starting, I would say kind of around 2010 to 2014, is just the realization of what's possible to do with hacking. Let's just take, you know, fast forward to the invasion of Ukraine. You know, we were all watching on television as it unfolded. And then on my computer screen on the left was just a flurry of messages to me. You'll never believe what, you know, the cyber hacktivists are doing. They called themselves all up. I know people who are in professional roles all over the globe who took vacation to go hack Russia on behalf of Ukraine. We can talk about whether that's legal in some other form. But the idea that the community would come together to create this chaos, like I felt like I was watching a movie. But I think even more interesting is what the Ukrainians did. They had started their conflict in 2014. They had kind of known what was coming, and they had prepared in ways that I was surprised. They recovered the satellite systems quickly. They recovered energy quickly. They recovered from hacks very quickly because they were able to reinstall, upgrade, and move on. And it's an interesting story. We think about how do we prevent attacks. We should think just as much about recovery from attacks. And how do we recover and get back to a state of good so that we can continue on if we're in that state. Now, you know, there's some developing situations the last 72 hours. We will all study that and see how that unfolded. But I think it's good lessons for all of us in kind of wherever we are at, that resiliency and recovery is just as important as all of the defensive protection that we talk about.
In the global landscape, any other thoughts on the U.S. role and our leadership?
No, I think I would just offer to Heather's point, right? We are and we should be leading as much as possible in terms of leadership and discussion and sharing information. I know that NSA, DHS, CISA, we've all take a forward stance right now on releasing as much of that information publicly, putting out cybersecurity advisories jointly with our Five Eyes partners, because we want people to be aware of here's the threat and here's how you mitigate it. And we're joining in that conversation. It's something that we're going to continue doing and ramp up even more. And so I know it's a space when it comes to AI that we will definitely be playing in.
We have 1 minute left, and I want to give an opportunity for 20-second pearls of wisdom for this group, for actions they can take.
Find out as much about AI as you possibly can. It is now your job. I went to a graduating ceremony for one of my nephews. He's only 12. And the headmaster, essentially their version of Dumbledore, stood up on the stage and said, your parents' jobs won't exist when you grow up. Learn everything you can about AI, get your kids educated. We cannot be smart enough on this.
Morgan.
AI can be used for good and it can be used for evil. Our job is to make sure that the stories are all about the good.
Hygiene, right? I mean, AI is great and it will change our jobs, but hygiene is going to get, still provides that foundational protections.
And in the spirit of Dumbledore, we are only as strong as we are united and as weak as we are divided. The information sharing, the ability of us to come together at an event like this, share information, meet each other, and know where those resources are is imperative. So I thank my esteemed panelists for a most engaging conversation, and we'll turn it over to the organizers.